Okay. Hello, everybody out in Armchair Dragoonland. This is Grant from Pushing Cardboard, and I'm delighted today to be able to speak with Frank Davis, legendary designer Frank Davis. How are you, Frank?
I'm very well, and thanks for having me on. And I'm looking forward to covering a lot of new ground with your listeners.
Well, Frank and I have spoken and written a fair bit back and forth in preparation for this. I told him, it's funny because I told him right off the bat that I was interested in his history because he was a designer and a developer in what many people would consider the first golden age of wargaming in the 70s. And then he's taken a break from the hobby, but he's back with some new designs. So I wanted to talk about both the old days and what he's got up his sleeve. And Frank comes back to me and he says, "Well, I have a series of slides that will illustrate a lot of that." So if that sounds good to everybody, I think that's what we're going to do today is go through Frank's slides and check out. We'll see what you have to say. If anybody watching live, feel free to post a comment, and I'll see if I can pass them on to Frank. But I think we might as well dive in, I think, Frank, unless there's something else you want to talk about before we get started.
No, I want to dive in.
All right. Let's put, there we go. Got the first slide up, and well, over to you, Frank, and I'll interject when I've got something to say or when somebody live has some kind of a question.
Okay, I don't know how many people are going to be watching this. I know there are a lot of other events. If you do have any questions, and you probably will, because very little of what I say ever makes sense at all. But if you have any questions, please load them up so Grant can show them on the screen, and I'll try and answer them. So I'm a very difficult person. I'm very iconoclastic, which is a word I learned from Jim Dunnigan. I do things my own way. I think a lot about things. I've thought for close to 70 years about war games and war game design. I have very different opinion from the vast majority of the people in the hobby, which should make my talk interesting. A lot of you will probably disagree with me. A lot of you will think, oh, he's from the dinosaur age. A lot of you will say, that he's just a crank. He's just throwing sand in the engine and all. But I want you to know, I'm not just a crank. I'm doing things because since I was 8 or 9 years old, I've been interested in designing a better war game. And I'll start off with something. I want to say that these slides, I'm not going to read them verbatim. I'm going to talk about the different things. I use them like cue cards or Post-it notes to remind me of certain things. And then I'm just sort of going to riff off the slides. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the difference between working at war and playing at war. In that, I mean the difference between being a war game designer and a war game player. And my first provocative comment here is on the bottom of the screen. The opposing player to the game designer is the game player. So what I'm suggesting here is there's already what's the word I want? It's not, there's already like a loyal opposition character to the relationship between being a game designer and being a game player. They're not at all the same in my estimation. And I'll try and make this clearer, but with the next slide.
Well, I have one question just before you go on, Frank. Do you I find some designers still play a lot of games, even other people's games, and some just they they pretty much, they look at other games, but they pretty much don't play much anymore. They just design. Do you still play?
That's a very good question. I have games. I have 100 games in my office here. I have games out playing every day. I'm reading rules every day. I'm thinking about the game every day. I'm comparing the game to other games I'm knowledgeable about. I'm comparing the game to my readings in history and my readings about basic game design ideas. So I'm totally involved with games, but to be I have to be honest and all like that. I have never enjoyed playing war games. That's the reason why I'm a war game designer. And that's why I said I'm different than everyone I meet in this hobby. And I'll explain why and all like that. But I just also want to point out that a lot of my ideas were formulated in 1971 when I started working at SPI. And one thing that's not widely known is that there were about 6 SPI personnel there. About 5 of them were designers. None of those people were what I would call enthusiastic game players. They were what I just said. They were enthusiastic about learning about the history and using the game to understand better the historical events that were being simulated. And the one thing I want to say is that SPI, unlike the common myth, SPI had 3 incredibly good play testers. And I want to move into the next slide in a minute, but the play testing, the playing of the games, we left to the professionals who were good players. The designers were doing something entirely different. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. Now, do I just click on the screen to move?
I think it will, but if not, I can get it to go for you.
Okay,
there you go.
Okay, it worked. Okay, so let's just start off with a little about my biography. There's a picture of my high school graduation, which was in 1965, and that other picture is about 2015, about 10 years ago and all. And on the left, that's the first game I ever played, which was actually the first war game, the first commercial war game in the United States. I believe it was 1956. I was born in 47. I'm 77 years old. So I was 9 years old when I got this game, and I hated it. And that's going to be the continuing story here, that I'm a designer because I believe that there are things that need improvement and all like that. I believe there are things like, that we should constantly be exploring and changing and being dissatisfied with whatever the current state of the art is and trying to push it further down the road. So let's go to the next slide. This slide is interesting to me, although the layout got messed up and all like that. It just says that I was born right after the end of World War II. The entire culture at that time was very much in the shadow of World War II. There were a lot of war movies. There were a lot of toys that were military toys, like that. There were no games until 1956, like that. But I talk about it in the summer. I used to play plastic soldiers outside with my best friend, who I'll mention in a minute. And in the winter, we built model tanks and planes and ships. Then we even built our own bazooka and a periscope, and the bazooka was a working bazooka and all like that. And we dressed as army men on Halloween. So we were living in the shadow of World War II, and it had a huge influence, and it's why I became a game designer. But my most important statement here is the fact that I didn't know it at the time, but my best friend, his name was Gary, his father was an experimental aircraft engineer designer who worked with Grumman, improving the performance of the carrier planes, including the F-4 Hellcat and the F-6 Wildcat. And those are the planes that actually, that America used to win the war in the Pacific. We didn't know that at the time, but this leads me into this conversation. I talked down in the bottom here. I said, unlike most slower gamers, I still find moving cardboard armies across a hex grid tedious. Something important has been lost to history. And what I wanted to say was this idea about the test engineer, the person who's working refining the airplanes, versus the pilots who are actually trying to fly and trying to shoot down the enemy. That's what I meant at the beginning when I said that there's a difference between a game designer and a game player. The player is like doing his best to avoid being shot down or to win the game and not lose his life and all like that. The designer is involved in getting feedback from the players, particular feedback about where they seem to be inferior to the enemy and all. And then they're constantly working to come up out of the blue, like and all like that, with new improvements to the aircraft that make a huge difference in the course of the war. And I find this test engineer guy, who I didn't even realize that that's what he was doing, I find that to be the best model of what a game designer is like. And while the game designer does not necessarily care who wins or loses, but the game designer cares why they're winning or losing on one side or another, like and all like that, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I'm just going to take this a step further. It's very important to get feedback from players, as any designer will tell you that. But it's also very important for the designer to be really open to what they're telling him. There's a famous story in World War II in the Pacific where the Americans had terrible torpedoes. And for 2 years, the American pilots of these planes, these torpedo bombers and all like that, kept reporting that the torpedoes weren't firing on impact, or they were going too low and going under the ship or something like that. Anyhow, the torpedo people just dismissed it. They just said, "Oh, the pilots never give you accurate reports. They always say like they sank 15 ships, even though there were only two, like and all like that." And anyhow, it took 2 full years for the pilots to convince the brass. It was mainly the brass in Washington that refused to believe this and all like that. But so the relationship that I'm talking about between the game player and the game designer is adversarial, as you can understand from like when people are reporting these problems, like and all, and you're not happy about saying, "God, I goofed up" or something like that, and all. It's adversarial, like and all, but it's really mutually beneficial, like and all. And as I said, having really, really good play testers is better than being a player yourself if you're a designer. It's a form of delegation of responsibility. You can't do everything well, like and all. So when I said something important has been lost to history and all like that, what do I mean by that and all? I mean that the experience of playing a war game feels less exciting and less interesting to me than the experience of reading a good book on a military event or watching a film about it. I have up here 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which is an old movie with Spencer Tracy from the 50s. It's not the most action-packed movie, but it has suspense. It has drama and all. Some people find enough of that in war games. I have never found enough of that in war games. To me, war games are pushing pieces of cardboard around the grid and then rolling a lot of dice and all. And unfortunately, I'm just not happy with games that's what they feel like. And so the bottom here, I'm going to get into trouble with Danny and all like that, but this is going to be part of my theme going forward. Danny Parker, who released The Last Gamble for Compass Games last year, he's an expert on the bulge.
He's the bulge guy, yeah.
And he's worked his whole life on studying the bulge, writing books about the bulge, designing games about the bulge. You can't be any better informed than Danny. And Danny spent about 10 years working on The Last Gamble. And he worked really hard, and I think it's a very good game. It's not my type of game, but I think that it's very well researched. I think he went way beyond average in terms of trying to take as much information as he could have and pack it into the game so that people who wanted to understand the bulge could understand it by studying the game almost as well as they could by reading like 6 books about the Battle of the Bulge and all. However, after Danny published the game, like that, I wrote to him to congratulate him and all. And I said, I could see that this was a massive achievement. So I wrote to him one day, this was about a year ago or a year and a half ago, and he replied back like within hours, and this is what he said: "It just doesn't work." And I'll try, and he's going to be mad because it's out of context, but I'll try and get to the context of that. But it sort of summarizes what I'm saying here, where the game is, there are things about the way we design war games that prevent them from reflecting the history the way it actually takes place at all. So let's keep going.
Frank, just before we talk about this next one, I'm totally on the same page as you about, never being satisfied, continually trying to improve and get closer to what your ideal is. But I like Danny Parker has designed probably 3 or 4 bulge games at least, and he must feel, even if he's not satisfied with his latest totally, he must feel that he's getting closer and closer. He's solving some things, even if he isn't getting to the holy grail of where he feels it's perfect.
I agree. He undoubtedly feels that he's making progress. And I agree that he's making progress. I agree that his more recent games on the bulge show a lot more understanding and appreciation of the situation and everything like that. I think we have to dive down a little later in the talk about what did Danny mean and what do I mean when I say it just doesn't work. I don't. Okay. Danny would probably allow himself to be categorized as a perfectionist, like and all, but I don't think it's a case of the Holy Grail and no game is going to be perfect. I think what I'm talking about, which I'm not sure Danny is 100% in line of what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what I call fundamental design, which we're going to talk about later, like and all like that, which means, are there problems in the game that break the system, that undermine the game as a historical simulation from the get-go, like and all? And are those problems not related to this particular game? Are they generic to the industry and all like that? So my position is, like and all, that Danny is moving forward all the time, but at the same time, we have some gotchas, some fundamental issues that I don't think we're even aware of, and I don't think we're talking about. I mean, some designers are. Mark Herman is definitely talking about these issues, but we need to get further into specific games to understand better why I'm saying I agree with Danny that it doesn't work at all. So just about myself, this is really, really quick, like and all. I've been designing games since 1956 because I did not like Tactics 2. I started designing games with my friend right away, and we actually played the games that we designed. You had asked me about playing games and all. And then in 1971, I was about 23 then. My girlfriend decided she was going to go to art school in New York, to the School of Visual Arts, which was on East 23rd Street. And it just so happened that I recently learned, within the last couple of months before this, that there was a new company in New York that was located on East 23rd Street, and they were publishing a magazine called Strategy and Tactics. I had just happened to find that in a hobby store. And I could say right now, and all, Strategy and Tactics, unlike today's industry, was a real innovation that basically changed the wargaming world, because it was combining the game and the game rules with the history all in one package. So for historical people like me, it might have been more interesting to read the article and like not necessarily play the game. For other people who wanted to play the games, it might have been interesting. There were a lot of people who obviously liked both aspects. And when you read the S&T article and you played the game, then probably if you were curious, you would probably try and learn more about like the war, the Battle of the Atlantic, which is what Wolfpack was about. Wolfpack, incidentally, was one of the first solitaire games designed by Jim Donegan. It was so different that, you know, I had no idea what he was trying to do. I was the developer and all like that. But it was one of the first solitaire games like in all, and it's obviously influenced a lot of games over the ensuing years. There's still a new game this year called Wolfpack and all. And then I worked for Avalon Hill for another 77, 80, another 5 years. So I was I think it was 6 years and 6 years at each company. And at Avalon Hill, I worked on several games. War and Peace and the Guns of August is developer. But this game over on the side, can you see the cursor?
No, they can't. But you're talking about Divine Wind?
Yeah, the game on the end here, Divine Wind. That's a game that I actually started designing in 1981 at Avalon Hill, and it's still not finished at all like that. And we'll talk about what's happened to that game, like and all like that. But I spent 40 years on that game, like and all, and it still has a ways to go. But I started that at Avalon Hill. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the companies and what the environment was like as we go to the next slide. But if anyone wants to know my background, we just did that. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, this is incidentally East 23rd Street. This is around 1975. And this little building here is the original office. And when I say original, there were other offices before I got involved there that were in 14th Street in the basement. But this is the first office on 23rd Street. A couple of years after this photo was taken, we moved to a much larger building down this way on the corner. But this office here, this was a three or four story building with one elevator, like and all. This area right here, this was Redmond's art department. Inside this, obviously, a nice window, like and all like that. And it was only two people who worked there. One of them, obviously, was Redmond, and he had a layout person who would paste up mechanicals for artwork for both the magazine and the games. His name was Manny Milcune, and those two people worked in this office. And it was very, very old-fashioned and primitive. Al Nofi says that it had the old, I forget what it's called, but the old style electric current, which is considered a little dangerous now.
Yeah.
And it also had an overhead pull toilet. And it also had, there were only, I think, 4 rooms. Donegan had 1 room. There was a shipping department. There was a small area where we could play test. We only had about 4 tables in this office, like and all. And the most interesting to me is there were only 6 employees at S&T at that time. And I want to just briefly run through my memories of these people, or my read on these people. And the most important thing about Jim is the most influential person I've ever met, even though he and I disagreed violently about everything. He affected my life, and he's affected, from what I understand, the lives of all the war game designers who started at SPI and all like that. we all speak of him being a very, very, very productive, creative, analytical guy, sort of a creative genius, wide range of interests and all like that. But the main thing I want to say is he was a numbers guy. And what do I mean by numbers guy? When you look at the old Strategy and Tactics magazine, there's going to be a lot of tables, like order of battle tables and tables of equipment and stuff like that. And there's going to be a lot of strength comparisons at different points in, let's say, the war in the East and all like that. Jim loved that kind of numerical analysis of military history, to the point where if you wrote anything that was flowery or literary or anything like that, Jim would say, like, and all like that, you know, where are the numbers, like, and all like that, and all. For instance, recently I read with a group led by Eric Lee Smith, I think it was Bruce Catton's books about the Civil War. Eric Lee Smith is an expert on the Civil War, and he suggested that book. Well, when I started reading that book, I felt, okay, this guy is a good writer. He's a literary writer. But his work is not nearly as analytical as what Dunnigan wanted us to do and all. Made a big impression on me, but I also rebelled against it eventually. Okay, about Redmond, with my memory of Redmond, first of all, he's probably the smartest person at SPI. He was not, it's hard to say, like, in all, he was not always playing war games, and he was not always designing games, and he was not always doing the historical research. But Redmond had graduated, I believe, from Pratt. No, it wasn't Pratt. My wife actually worked at the college that Redmond went to and all like that. Anyhow, the school is known for engineering, and Redmond's expertise was what they call information design. And he was a genius at that. So the whole way S&T would lay out the magazine with the use of shaded panels to highlight different types of information, which complemented Jim's idea about the tables and charts. And obviously that appeared in the games too, with the tables and charts, like, and all like that. And the whole idea of incorporating as much player aid and as much player aid information as possible into the game map. That's all Redmond. And it's not something that everyone follows nowadays, but I still think it was the right way to do it. I think like some people, I understand, they like just the geography. They don't want to see the game related information on the map and all like that. But I still feel that that was a smarter way to do it, to incorporate as much as possible.
It feels like Redmond was the first graphic designer in the hobby to think about player experience, player usability, not just, how does the game work, but how do we make it easier for the player to play and keep involved in the game? The whole thing about keeping your eyes on the map instead of having to look up charts. That was his idea, and it was genius.
Yes, exactly. I want to clearly differentiate this from the way a lot of other people think about game graphics. When I first met Redmond, I was writing an article on the War of 1812. And I said to Redmond, I would like some nice period illustrations with this article. And Redmond said, you got them? And all like that. And I said, no. And he said, well, I'm not an illustrator. I'm not going to be able to supply illustrations and all like that. And all. So I said to him, I know someone who's a military illustrator, and he can do these things. He can make custom maps, and he can make drawings of the old guard, and all like that, and everything like that. And Redmond hired this person for that game freelance, and he did the illustrations. If you look at that S&T copy, the War of 1812 article, which I wrote, you'll see that these illustrations are in there. But Redmond told me at that point, I am not an illustrator. I am not an artist. I have a very good sense of clarifying complicated information systems and all like that. And yes, I think that he totally influenced the way every game has been like, the way every game looks since then. Fortunately, there's been a lot of advances in production, as well as graphic artists hired to do more illustrative work on maps. So today the graphics are far, far better, but I don't think the information design is any better than when Redmond did it. Okay, moving on. I don't know if he was a history teacher, like and all like that. He was, in my opinion, the most pure history person at SPI. Dunnigan was more what I would call like a creative, artistic, analytical guy, like and all like that, whereas Nofi would just find the answer to any historical question that you could have and all. And he was very interested, like in very esoteric subjects, like 16th century naval warfare or something like that and all. He was, I don't know if anyone here knows what I'm talking about, but there was a group called the Band in the 70s, and the band had one guy who had been trained as a classical musician, and he was what the band referred to as their music teacher. And that's the way Al Nofi was. Al Nofi was someone like who had a much wider perspective on history. We would all have some knowledge of the game we were working on. We were all reading history. We were all learning it. But Nofi had already accumulated a wide amount of knowledge on history. David Isby was going to Columbia at this time, like in all, for a master's in history. Isby was very much like Al Nofi in the sense that he wanted to know everything about whatever subject interested him. And he wound up writing a lot of books for Jane's Fighting Ships or Jane's Aircraft. He also ingested a lot of like what Dunnigan had about numerical analysis. Not just, as I said, not just narrative writing about the event, but about the facts underlying that. Like you could write an article about COVID and all like that, but you could also have a lot of tables and charts that would illustrate how the COVID disease spread and all like that. And what I'm saying is S&T was much more interested in presenting that background information that was really not available in a lot of history books that you were reading at that time at all. Okay, Fred Schachter, who still is in the game industry, I believe, and I think he designs games now. He was the office manager who hired me, which I can mention like how I got hired. I was the first shipping and customer service person. I mean, apart from the days when Jim would ship the products out himself and all like that. And then I had mentioned before these three play testers. Bob Champer looked like a total hippie. Ed Curran and Tom Walzak, who were both, I believe, accounting or business majors, very math-oriented people, like, you know, they were the three play testers. This was the whole company. And I already explained, it was a very small, broken down, old warehouse, but a small warehouse, like a warehouse about the size you would expect to have for a delicatessen. And all six of us were working in there. There was sometimes there was no heat. There was never any air conditioning. Sometimes we didn't have a water cooler. I remember one day I was packing the games in the winter, and there was no heat and no electricity. So we were trying to pack the games from candlelight and all. And I just bring this up, like, you know, because it's important to understand that we were working in adverse conditions, and we were like the French army in Russia in 1812, like, you know, like that, and we kept going and all. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, here's a slide like in all that I found like online, like in all. This actually shows you the people I'm talking about who were there in the 1970s. And you can probably read it yourself and all like that, but I'll just mention a couple of highlights. This is Irad Hardy, who designed the Civil War game, the American Civil War, and Scrimmage, and CA, and a couple of other early games like that. This is Mark Herman, who everyone knows. I don't need to explain who he is. This is me in the 1970s, like in all. This is Eric Goldberg, who sort of designed more science fiction and fantasy games. And all. This is Dave Isby. This is Kevin Zucker, who went on to found the Operational Studies Group that does a lot of work on Napoleonic games. This is Rich Berg, the most prolific designer, I think, in history, like in all. And also a lawyer and a kibitzer and all like that. Rich Berg could tell you anything you wanted to know, or even a lot that you didn't want to know about any subject at all. Coming down here, this is Greg Kostikian, who I believe wound up working for the State Department. And all. He also designed a couple of weird games like The Creature That Ate Sheboygan and all. And incidentally, there's no relationship between the State Department and the designer of The Creature That Ate Sheboygan at all. That's just a coincidence at all. This is Tom Walczak, the play tester that I mentioned. This is Redmond and all. This is Jim Dunnigan. This is Howard Barish, who was more of a financial manager, but did do some game design. Like in well, this is way over here in the corner. This is Brad Hessel, who also became the manager of R&D, probably around 76 and all like that. Brad did the games Cobra, and I'm not sure. He probably was a developer on Destruction of Army Group Center. I'm not sure. Like in all. And then this is Joe Bukowski, who's again designed a million games and knows everything about D-Day and World War II in Normandy that I've ever encountered. This is in 1975, and then I just picked out a few quotes. One I remember for Dunnigan was "different strokes from different folks." That was in response to this whole idea of who are the monster games for? Who is Napoleon at Waterloo for? Why the hell are we making a game Scrimmage about football and all like that? Dunnigan used that phrase and all, meaning that everyone likes different kinds of games, and we're not going to be successful if we only have a narrow mindset about what games should be like in law. And the reason Dunnigan hired all these people, the reason was he couldn't cover all the ground that he wanted to. So when he hired Irad Hardy, Irad was interested in the Civil War and, like I said, in the football game. And these two teamed up. Jim and Irad teamed up to do that scrimmage game. But like I said, most of these people came on board with areas of interest or specialties and all like that. And Jim would right away put them to work in their area of interest and all like that. And he was very good at recruiting. He was very good at scouting people. He was very good at telling people when they weren't good enough at all. Okay, Jim also said this to me in 1974, the fewer moving parts, the better the game. This again was at the beginning of the monster game era and all. And it's also interesting that at the same time Jim was working on War in the East, which was the first monster game and all like that, he was also designing Napoleon at Waterloo, which people don't even necessarily consider a serious war game. But that Napoleon at Waterloo was an example of what Jim would call an elegant design, because it was stripped down, reasonably fast to play and to set up. And it was an interesting game situation, but there weren't a lot of pieces, and it wasn't a big map or anything like that. Then this quote from Kevin Zucker. Kevin was a person who worked with Redmond editing the rules, and we would bring Kevin all these rule books, and Kevin's job was to make sure, like and all, that the rules were clear enough and understandable and all. And I did my best. I was a pretty good writer. A law school told me like that my game rules were something that they would use in law school to teach people how to write. But Kevin thought all of our rules were like very vague and not very that they wouldn't answer all the questions that people would have when they played the games. And he was right about that. And then he admitted to me that's because what we're trying to do is impossible, which is write a set of game rules that is, 100%, like, that will answer all questions. And I already mentioned Danny Parker, like, so, okay. So after 1977, and I should be clear, the reason that I'm now talking about Avalon Hill was that in 1976, I worked on a monster game of my own called Wellington's Victory. And Jim Dunnigan was very much, as much as he was a great researcher and a historian and a creative artist and all like that, he was also a person with a very practical sense for business and all like that. And because he was a numbers guy, he had worked out how much we could afford to spend on any game, how much time, how much hourly wages and all like that. And that would all be assigned to any game designer or developer. If you did not come in on time and on budget, like and all like that, it didn't matter how good the game was. You were blackballed by Jim Dunnigan and all. And I was one of the people, if you talk to some of the SPI employees, I was one of the ones who was blackballed first and very dramatically, like and all like that. I remember that Jim Dunnigan once said, we were having an R&D meeting, which is where all the designers would talk about the status of their product. And Dunnigan, this was while I was working on Wellington's Victory. Dunnigan said, we're all like plow horses on a big plantation that Davis is running to design his big game up in the plantation house, like and all like that. And he's raising thoroughbreds and all like that. And, I can talk about it in a joking way, but both Dunnigan and I were serious. I believe we needed to spend as much time as the game required and all. And Dunnigan believed, like and all, that he had the mentality of a magazine publisher. Every 2 months, that magazine had to go to the publishers. We had 30,000 subscribers and all like that. We couldn't miss deadlines and all. Anyhow, going down with Avalon Hill, and I'll try and talk a little about how Avalon Hill was different. When I went to Avalon Hill in 1977, it was only slightly bigger than SPI. There were 8 employees, like and all like that. Eric Dott was the original printer for the Avalon Hill games, and he took over the games because basically Avalon Hill couldn't meet his payroll and stuff like that. So he sort of took the stock of what he had printed and he held it ransom, and he said, I'm taking over the company and all like that. And but he was very good about letting the company continue to run the war game side of it the way the war game people wanted it to be run and all like that. And he, unlike Dunnigan, he was not as concerned with the financial side, like and all. Anyhow, Tom Shaw was the VP of marketing, and he was also the personnel person. Tom Shaw recruited me through a headhunter in 1977. Tom Shaw's famous remark to me is, it doesn't matter what the game is or what the title is, but the box has to be red. Then there's Don Greenwood, who was the editor of the General and one of the key people behind Squad Leader and all. And he was a quiet, not an extrovert at all, a quiet, introverted person who would be working in his office, and the rest of us would rarely see him. And he would be like, obviously, assigning articles and editing articles and then putting together the General magazine, like and all. he probably had the hardest job at Avalon Hill. And he was considered, well, no, he wasn't considered the head of R&D. The next person, Randy Reed, was the head of R&D. Randy Reed designed The Longest Day. He designed the game about World War I airplanes, not Flying Circus. I think it was Richthofen's War and all. Randy was much more extroverted and more mainstream than most of the people I met in the wargaming world. Randy is the kind and all like that who could be in a corporate meeting almost anywhere and like people would respect him and all. Whereas someone like me, you couldn't bring me to any corporate meeting and get any respect at all. Mick Yule, who's passed away, like and all like that, was a specialist on the Civil War in Gettysburg. He did 2 or 3 games on Gettysburg. He lived in Baltimore, and almost every weekend he was out at the Gettysburg battlefield and all, doing research for his games, but actually just walking the ground and making sure he understood every inch of it and all. He worked with another person, Rich Hamlin, who came from Maine and all, who was also very much interested in the American Civil War. But also Rich Hamlin is, I believe, the developer of Victory in the Pacific and possibly War at Sea and all, which were very big selling games for Avalon Hill, like and all. And again, these were more like beer and pretzels games. The Longest Day, which I mentioned by Randy Reed, was not a beer and pretzels game, but that was kind of the outlier for Avalon Hill and all. Bruce Milligan was the person behind most of their sports games, along with Tom Shaw and all like that. Avalon Hill had a big sports business of sports games. Their games were very good and all. And basically everyone else shunned Bruce because none of us were interested in sports. I was a game designer. I told you I was recruited there by a headhunter and all, and it was because I had done Wellington's Victory, which was a monster game and all, and Avalon Hill had heard that it was this massive achievement, like what I was saying about The Last Gamble and all like that. So they brought me down and they said, we have a game project, like and all, that we've had 2 other people try and work on, and they haven't been able to do it. And we want to hire you because we think, they said, we had heard you're a wunderkind and that you'll be able to design this game. That game was Rising Sun, and like all the other people, I failed to design it. I'm still working on it and all. But that was my first experience of failure as a war game designer, and I carry that with me like a wound my whole life, like and all. And the problem with the game is playability. Same thing with Pacific War by Mark Herman. It's a great game, tremendous amount of research, tremendous amount of work in it, and smart work and all like that, but almost unplayable. And I realized that my game was going to be completely unplayable, and I couldn't like release it like and all like that. Anyhow, I was the first one who went from SPI to Avalon Hill, but after I was there, Avalon Hill would ask me, are there other people at SPI who we should look at and all? And SPI was running into financial problems and personnel problems, like and all like that. So I was helpful in Avalon Hill recruiting these people who are among the best people who have ever been working in the war game field, like and all. That doesn't include me. I'm not among the best, but these 3 are and all. Just a word about Avalon Hill. Avalon Hill was located in an old school building from the 1860s, I believe, 1850s or 1860s, in downtown Baltimore near Bolton Hill, which is a section of Baltimore, like and all. It was a 3-story building. Again, not anything like a modern office. It was kind of primitive, what you would think of as a 19th century school building. No air conditioning. It did have better heat, and it did seem to have electricity, like and all. But what I specifically remember is almost all the designers had fireplaces in their office. We didn't have air conditioning, but we had fireplaces in our offices because that was the heat system for the school kids in those days and all. Do I want to say anything else? Just that overall, my feeling was that SPI was much more of a factory, much more production driven, much more ambitious. Avalon Hill was more like a southern. Well, let me put it this way. When I first went to Avalon Hill, I went around the corner to get a sandwich in a delicatessen. I had been working in New York for SPI. I went around the corner in Baltimore to get a sandwich in a delicatessen. It took them 25 minutes to make the sandwich and all like that. And Avalon Hill was similar like that. It was much more relaxed, slower paced. That was one of the big differences. Okay, now just to sum up this part, the interesting thing is that both companies went out of business. Avalon Hill made money, SPI lost money, but made history and all. Both companies paid the game designers as little as possible. There were no unions, and there was no real competition. I did get a raise when I went from SPI to Avalon Hill and all like that, but I was still being paid like what would be considered poverty wages today. And I want to also say there was no dress codes, no time tracking at any of these. You were working there independently, very much like independent study in college or blue sky research in science, no one really knew what you were doing. No one really they almost never even asked questions. You were like a research scientist working on a project and all like that. And when you made a discovery, you would let them know, it's interesting because nowadays most games are designed out of house. These two companies tried to design games in-house, and I think that they were smart because they left the designers alone. Sometimes this created business problems, like that, but the companies simply provided, the distribution. The research and development of the games was purely done by the game designers themselves. There was no hierarchy. There were no supervisors. There was no people who said, well, I think the game should have this, or I think you should change that. Again, play testers who would come in would play the game, and you would listen to what they said and all like that. But no one in the management told you anything to do about a game. AH had computer.
I wanted to ask you, you had one famous game that traveled from SPI to Avalon Hill, your Frederick the Great game. SPI sent sold a few games to Avalon Hill, but were you part of the decision of bringing that game to Avalon Hill, or was that strictly between Dunnigan and Avalon Hill?
That happened near the time that I was going to leave Avalon Hill. Avalon Hill started to drain away talent from SPI, as I mentioned a minute ago, and they also were always interested in buying product from SPI. I should say, Avalon Hill always felt it was weird. Avalon Hill made more money. They had bigger distribution. They had channel sales. They were in retail stores like Toys R Us. But they always felt that SPI games were more serious war games and all. They weren't exactly jealous, but they were admirers of what Dunnigan and his team would do. You have to remember that Dunnigan also designed for Avalon Hill back in 1967.
Yeah,
And
right.
he designed for them because, like me, he played a game by Avalon Hill and he thought it was terrible. And he wrote to them and he complained. And somehow that morphed into him designing Jutland. And Jutland was, this is to show you how independent designers were. The original Jutland, there was not going to be any game board or anything. You were going to play it on the floor and all like that. And that was based on the old Fletcher Pratt system of naval rules that obviously Dunnigan had studied and all like that. But
there's a question from Pat for you as well, Frank. Molotov Cocktail wants to know, were the offices close to the New York City Public Library? Imagining much time was spent there on research.
Yeah, that's a good question, but the answer is no. I mean, we weren't far from the New York Public Library, but the New York Public Library was less resource rich for our purposes than the Columbia Library. Dunnigan was a graduate of Columbia. Bokowski was a graduate of Columbia. Not sure about Nofi. Isby was a graduate of Columbia. They all did most of their research from the collection of the Columbia Library, which was a big university library, and had a better history collection and all. And they, Al Nofi spent more time at the Columbia Library than he spent in the SPI offices. And David Isby was the same way. And the good thing was, if you had a question, you would give it to Al or Dave, and they would come back with the answer. Now, there were some limitations and all. When I was doing Frederick the Great, let's get back to Frederick the Great through this. And all. When I was doing Frederick the Great, I decided that the essence of the game was supply, logistics, like in threatening supply lines, and not at all about like combat and all. And it became a famous game because it tried to reflect what they called the war maneuver, which was that the way to win was to threaten the other person's supply line, not to beat his army and all like that. So, because I had decided about supply being important, I tried to do research on the supply systems used in the 7 Years' War and all. And there was very, very little available. And I asked Al Nofi and Dave Isby to go to Columbia and see what they could dig up, and there was very little available and all. At that time, SPI had consultants that we were designing games for people in the Army, and our contacts were out of Fort Benning in Georgia and all. And there were two guys who came up from Fort Benning and all, and I don't know exactly what their role was in the Army and all like that, but they met me, and I told them about this problem, and they said, "We will get you the answer. We have the National Archives, we have the Army Library, and all like that." And it took them about a month, and then I met them. They would come back from time to time to work on a game that we were developing for them. Well, anyhow, after about a month, they came back and they said, "No, we don't have the information either." They said the only chance that you would have is if you went to France or Germany and you could read that language, and you might be able to find some information, but it might not be exactly, it might not be that helpful. But I was trying to solve the problem of how far would the Army be able to operate away from its supply depot. And the supply depot is where they made the bread and everything like that. So I had real specific questions. If you had 20,000 men in the field, how far away from your supply depot could you be and still get the food, and all like that? And obviously, all the other things an army needs, and all like that. Anyhow, the question was never answered authoritatively. I just took my best guess at Frederick the Great, and all. And you asked about Frederick the Great migrating to Avalon Hill. It happened either after I left or right around the time I was leaving Avalon Hill. Eric Dodd asked me, should he buy that game and all like that? And I said, well, I'm kind of biased and all like that. But he asked other people, like Mark Herman and people like that. And as I said, Mark Herman and Joe Bukowski and Kevin Zucker were on their way to Avalon Hill, or were already there. So he had several sources of information about, and he did buy a number of SPI games and all. And the ones he bought were smart buys, like, because he had these designers telling him what to buy and all. Someone had also said something about they had computers in '93. I left Avalon Hill in '82, so there were no computers when I was there. So we're going to go into a different section, which the slide is messed up. So let's take a short break. The next section is going to be about game design. That was really about, my career at the different offices and all like that. The next section is going to be about my evolution as a game designer and what I'm working on now and what I'm thinking about now. So I just need a break to take a sip of seltzer. If anyone has any questions, now is a good time to ask.
Yeah, well, I was glad to hear about what happened with Frederick the Great. I think you were right about Mark Herman loving that game. I think I either heard him say it or I read him. He wrote about it. He said for years that was the game that he used to pack in his luggage when he was going on business trips, because it was the game that he could just set up quick in his hotel room on the hotel table and play one of the scenarios, and he just never got tired of it, he said.
Mark is, well, first of all, I appreciate that. I'm in awe of Mark. Mark is a better designer and a far more prolific designer than I could ever be at all. And he's also an excellent writer. I'm reading his book right now. All his games are masterpieces as far as I'm concerned. The reason why I think Mark may have felt that way is that Mark is a chess player.
Right.
This is going to lead right into the second part of this conversation. Chess, there's only a few spaces on the board and there's only a few pieces on the board. And it is a war of maneuver. It's a war of positioning, like that. And a lot of people in the game industry talk about chess-like games, there's a audience that likes those style of games, and there's an audience that doesn't like those style of games. There's an audience that likes games that are that they don't like it if there's no luck involved, but there's another audience that doesn't like it if there's too much luck involved. Chess is considered a skill game with very little luck, if any. But the main thing about Frederick the Great, and it's going to be true of the games I'm going to be talking about now, the main thing is, because it's so limited in scope, in footprint, in moving pieces, and in ideas built into the game, it's very approachable. It's very hard for most war gamers because 18th century warfare was completely different than warfare like in World War II. So it feels very unfamiliar. It doesn't feel right. The same way I say Tactics 2 didn't feel right. It doesn't really feel like a war game to a lot of people. But on the other hand, designers are interested in games where they see you could say it's like the difference between a sonata and a symphony or an opera. So, some pieces are small pieces, but they're really well done, like For Elise by Beethoven and all. Or it can be like a 3-hour opera by Wagner, or maybe a 6-hour opera and all like that. So just war games follow that exact model. A lot of games are like Wagnerian operas. There's a mainstream of games that are more like sonatas or quartets, and then there are a few games that are like bagatelles or something like that. And people don't like, people might not like all three groups or something like that. Anyhow, I feel that Frederick the Great was a lucky break in that I had mentioned earlier that Dunnigan had said the fewer the pieces, the better the game. And Dunnigan had stressed to me the idea of elegance of game design as opposed to everything but the kitchen sink and all. And I think I succeeded and with Frederick the Great in making it a very simple, small game that, like chess, was still interesting to play and all. A lot of designers over the years have been very nice about that game, like and all like that. And incidentally, my second game, Wellington's Victory, was the exact opposite. It was 4 maps. It was 1,000 counters. It took at least like 25 hours to play, like and all like that. So anyhow, let's just start talking about the evolution of game design. Once again, I may be saying too much about it, a lot of these things. You could just step in and say, let's move on or something like that. So I just mentioned the part about like a small number of pieces and a small number of locations. You can't really see it down here because the format got ruined and all. But I talk about it here, the evolution of game design is that there's been more and more pieces and more places on the board. When you think of Clue or Monopoly or chess or something like that, there's a very small number of places on the board and there's a very small number of pieces. And mainly people move one piece on their turn and then something happens and all like that. War games, not quite from the very beginning, but war games have always said, oh, this is a lot more complicated. This is a bigger story. This deserves more time, more effort, more of everything. So this is just an example of what I went through in designing a game called Divine Wind, which is my version of my statement about the Pacific War. And this is an important slide because this is an old search screen from a game like I'm not sure, but it's similar to the one in Bismarck. This is an early hex grid version of the Pacific. This is a more recent point-to-point game where movement is channeled, like almost like a State of Siege game or something like this. This is a famous and popular game where you can see the number of areas has been reduced from this and this down to here and all like that. When I was working, even when I was working at Avalon Hill many years ago, which was then called Rising Sun, and all, I began to be bothered by this idea. Why are there all these blue hexes in the middle of the Pacific and all like that? And I said, well, they're really there, so they should be on the map. But then the more I learned about the Pacific War and the more I understood the kind of game that I wanted to make, I came to the point where I found out there were never any battles that were more than 200 to 300 miles from land at all. And what I realized is that most of this area is not needed. It's not that it's necessarily a bad looking map, but it gives the wrong impression of what this war is about. And plus, it also just becomes annoying because if you're bringing someone from Pearl Harbor down here, unless you know the exact distance, you get involved in counting all these hexes and all like that. And that slows play. Plus, you have ranges of aircraft and ranges of fleets, like and all like that, before how far they can go before they have to return to base and stuff like that. And this amount of locations is a problem and all. So anyhow, I was working on this for many years. I said I began in 1982. I was working on this for many years. I should mention, I don't like the look of these three. And that's why I made it my main. Well, they also have very strange game concepts and mechanics. I'll just say briefly about this one. if you understand the war in the Pacific was not about allocating all your ships to all these areas. There's a naval historian named Mahan who formulated the theory back in the late 19th century, which was concentration of naval power. So this whole approach of dividing your ships and all like that to build a perimeter, there was a perimeter, but it was mainly air bases. The ships would never be distributed like that. The ships were always in Japan or in I think it was Singapore or Truk and all like that. Similarly, the United States fleets would either be in Pearl Harbor in Australia or in New Caledonia. There's another name for what I'm thinking of down there and all. So this idea of this spatial relationship, it works, it produces a game, but in my opinion, it gives people the wrong idea of what this war was actually like and all. So anyhow, I didn't really like any of these approaches, and all like that. And I was I was searching for something for years, and I eventually found this map in a book about modern naval war. Well, I'm not sure if it was modern or not because it has a Japanese flag, but this was a official history summary of the way to understand certain Pacific campaigns. And what they did was they made these large circles, which were sort of areas, and these small circles, which were sort of like objectives, and all like that. And right away, when I saw this, I was instantly attracted to this. First of all, it looked very simple compared to some of the others. Second, it looked very neat and organized compared to the others, and all like that. And third, pretty much it left out all the little subdivisions of places where you shouldn't really be worrying about them. And so Mark Herman, I was reading this today in his book, he talks a lot about this in his design for both Pacific War and Empire of the Sun. He comes up with a very different solution than I came up with, and all like that. But his solution is a good appreciation of this problem I'm talking about, especially Empire of the Sun. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the next slide is something, like I said, I'm provocative. So I was also reading about this game today. I'm somewhat of a fan of professional football. I like the Kansas City Chiefs, but I'm not really much of a sports enthusiast and all like that. But I was reading the rules to scrimmage. I was there when this game was being designed and developed. And even then, it was like going off the deep end. I mean, Donegan knew that wargamers were not going to be thrilled with this at all. It's not like Donegan designed this, but Irad Hardy developed it, and Irad was a football player. But if you read the rules to this, the first paragraph says, scrimmage is the ultimate war game. It had a big influence on all the later SPI games, one of which I know was the plot to assassinate Hitler and all like that. But it also influenced a lot of tactical man-to-man games that later came that were more closely aligned with the war theme, the way people think of it. But of course, if you know enough about football, you know that this is a man-to-man tactical game and all like that. But what interests me about this is this statement right here. Imagine knowing what football play is coming next. This is like a play, a play thing and all like that. And this is picked in secret, right? The other player doesn't know which play you're going to play and all like that. And so these are just some things about football that I compare to war games. There's an offensive plan chosen in advance in secret. The defense lineup is not known at the beginning. In other words, you don't get to see the defense line and then make your plan. It's sort of simultaneous, like that. This one is important, even though it sounds trivial. There's actually now a 40-second play clock, but in 1976, when they instituted it, there was only a 30-second play clock. Why is this important? In my opinion, war games take way too long. And football, before they instituted this, was also, both football and baseball were boring people. And my reaction to most war games is that I get bored. I listened to Aardwolf last night, and he talked about playing a big game, and his wife came to pick him up. And the game went on, and so his wife got there 2 hours early and all. And after they got in the car to go home, his wife said, "That is the most boring thing I've ever seen in my life," and all like that. And I wouldn't go quite so far as that, but to me, most war games are tedious. They take too long. They would benefit by a play clock, like in chess and like in major league sports, like and all like that. People, gamers probably don't like that idea, and there's reasons for that. Gamers like studying all the possibilities, and we'll get into whether that's a good thing or not. Okay. Obviously, in football, most things are simultaneous movement. Obviously, there's hidden information in football. In war games, people want to play in solitaire, so you can't really have hidden information. Well, I think games suffer drastically because of that and all like that. And then the last thing is, in this game, which I don't know if you can see, they tried to impose a hex grid on the football field and all. And consequently, they came up with all these things about zones of conflict, zones of contact and facing, and every player has to worry about every hex he moves in, and there's movement points, and there's contact points and everything like that, all of which are actually ingenious by Dunnigan. They actually led him to understand how to design tactical war games and all. And they're very appropriate to the game of football. The problem is that it's very long and tedious to play this game, even though you only have 11 pieces on each side and all like that. Any tactical war gamer would realize like how influential this game is. There's what they call passive contact and active contact. Active contact is more likely to put you out of the play. Passive contact is more likely to delay you and all like that. There's actual plays. You secretly pick whether you're going to do a pass play or a run play, whether you're going to run left or whether you're going to run right, whether you're going to throw a long pass or not. Similarly, the defense has different strategies, like in all, to counter what they think the play is going to be called. This is a real combat game with a very sophisticated capture of the elements of football and all. It's all done really well. The only problem is that it's not a fun game to play, and it takes a long time.
I had that game back in the day, Frank, and that my biggest remembrance of it was that it took about 10 minutes to play a single play. Like I could never imagine playing a complete game of football with that system, because it's like, let's play the last 2 minutes of an exciting game. That would take long enough.
Yes, and like a lot of war games, the designers would say, well, our intention was just to concentrate on one play. We were going to drill down into the mechanics of what goes on in one play. That's why it's called scrimmage. That's why it's not called football and all like that. And you could link together a series of plays if you have, not too much other things in your life. You could link together a series of plays. They didn't even have the end zones though, like that. It was really based on the idea of run a play and see if you gain yards. And in that way, it's brilliant and it's really well thought out. But I'm bringing this up because it was a total, well, first of all, we should also say it was a total failure because the theme is not popular. no matter how good your game design or mechanics are, if the theme is not something that attracts enough people, the game is going to be a failure. And I like that. The second thing is like that it was tedious to play. It didn't take that long to set up. It didn't take that long to read the rules, like like that. But as you said, it took a long time to execute one play, and people just felt they felt that the time is out of joint. They felt like when I said at the very beginning, something is lost to history. Something is lost to the game of football when you're playing this tactical football scrimmage game, like and this is going to influence my designs, like like that. All these elements here, like although I haven't mastered any of them. Okay, so the next slide. I'm sure I'm getting to the point where everyone is ready to go to sleep. Okay, I just want to go quickly through this. The second major career I have is as a screenwriter. I've never had a screenplay produced, but I've had several screenplays optioned and all like that. And getting it optioned is hard enough, believe me. The reason why it's hard to get a screenplay produced is that the minimum it's going to cost is about $30 million. So while game publishers are willing to look at your work pretty easily, movie people are not willing to look at your work. They want to see a track record. They want to see like that you're recommended by other people in the business. Quick story: the guy who wrote Mad Men, he worked for the guy who wrote The Sopranos. The guy who wrote The Sopranos was the head of that show, and under him was the guy who wrote Mad Men. I don't remember his name right now. So while he was writing for The Sopranos, he wrote the pilot script for Mad Men, and he gave it to David Sanborn, who's the guy who wrote The Sopranos. And David Sanborn said, "This is perfect. Don't change anything." Okay. And obviously the guy was thrilled, like like that. He sent it out. Everyone rejected it, and all like that. And this happens all the time. I always bring up the fact that Moby Dick was rejected by a publisher who said, "Drop the whale and we might take a second look." So anyhow, to keep moving on, I write, this is important, I write thrillers which treat a film like an amusement park ride. The key rule is never be bored. A good screenplay has no extraneous scenes, characters, words, or pages. The maximum movie length is 2 hours. It's now down to more like an hour and a half. And then I say, we all know when a movie feels too long, but most of us are okay playing a game that lasts all day. I'm not, and I never have been. I'll say this in a minute. I'll read this quote in a minute. But what I was going to say is the key thing about screenwriting that's so different is if you write a screenplay and you ask someone to read it, not even to produce it, if you ask someone to read it and they're in the industry or they know anything, if they feel the first 2 pages are boring, they're going to reject it. They're going to, like that. If the screenplay is more than about 90 pages, they're going to reject it. Screenplays generally run 1 page per minute of screen time. So what I'm saying, and writers know that it's considered disrespectful or self-centered for you to ask someone to read your screenplay if your screenplay has not been whittled down to its finest form, like a Michelangelo statue and all like that. It's considered bad form, and this really irks me because I'm also a screenwriter, and yet I see game designers who seem to have no concern about people's time, and they like some software designers that I know. They say, well, whatever we give them, they'll play, and all like that. And unfortunately, to a large extent, that's true, like that. But what I'm trying to bring up here is it's tremendously egotistical to ask someone to set up a game that takes 2 hours to set it up or something like that. It's tremendously self-centered to not say, have I done everything I can to make this game as economical, as elegant, and all as I can, and all. And if you haven't, you really shouldn't be like trying to sell it, in my opinion, and all like that. Now there are people who love long games and all like that. I don't really understand them. I can tell you at the age of 77, I have no interest in setting up a game on 4 maps like all that takes 2 hours to set up and then takes like 8 hours a day for 4 days to play. I just worry, am I going to survive to the end of this game? I don't like that. And then there's one quote which has to do with like speed, it's from the movie Patton, and he says to Omar Bradley, give me 400,000 gallons of fuel and I'll put you in Germany in 2 days. That comes up in my game on the Western Front. The real problem is the 400,000 gallons of fuel, not how fast the tanks move, like that. And the reason why this is here is I was talking before about do game designers really capture the right things when they design a game? Is it the combat strength that matters, or is it the 400,000 gallons of fuel that matters? And all like that. And we'll be talking about that too. I'm trying to go a little faster. Okay, so this covers a lot of the same material, so I'll go through it. To me, war games feel more like math puzzles than dynamic military situations. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is there are too many locations, too many units, too many game concepts, and too many rules to be enjoyable. Third thing that irks me is war game players like to have godlike control and knowledge. Too much knowledge lengthens playtime and reduces both realism and fun, which I'll have to explain a little further into the thing. But I can do this now. Dunnigan is known, Mark Herman tells a story about Dunnigan when he first met him, and Dunnigan said, there's a reason why the word dead is in deadline, and all like that. And what my remake of that is to say, there's a reason why the word fun is in fundamental. I'm a fundamental designer, and what I'm saying is, if the game is not fun, then you're not designing a fundamental design, and also you may be actually reducing realism by putting in too much detail, which we'll talk about. Okay, and then the actual experience of playing the game, I say players have too much information about the terrain, about the enemy, about their strength, about the reinforcement schedules, and the victory conditions. We get to another designer here who I want to talk about, but it's going to be in a later slide. This is from a new designer from Australia named Clint Warren Davies. Hold on a minute. Can you see this game that I'm holding up? This is his game. It's called 1 Hour World War II. Can you see it in my window?
Yeah. It's small, but we can see it. But yeah, he's just come out with this 1 hour World War II game. I think it just came out this summer.
Yeah, he's a fundamental designer, and I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. But he's one of the only people I know who's a game designer who has a real methodology. I mean, Mark Herman has a methodology too, but this guy has it. He's like one of those chefs who can slice everything really fast and all like that. Anyhow. Yeah, for me, many games take too long to learn and too long to play. New gamers are repelled, and experienced gamers are bored. And then, just to give an example, on our deathbed, how many of us will say, I only wish I could replay the Longest Day campaign game and all. So you can see I'm a tough audience. I'm a tough audience, and I've tried to explain why through the information about screenwriting and through the information about why a game that has hexes for every 50 miles in the Pacific is a game that's not really doing a good job of simulating the Pacific War and all. So let's keep going. We're getting further along. This one we can go pretty fast. These are my early designs. After this comes my current designs and all. and this is Frederick the Great, and this is the one that was four maps, Wellington's Victory. Those are the only two games that I've designed. I've developed probably about 10 games, but these are the only two games I designed. This one took about 7 or 8 months, which Dunnigan said was too long. And well, it's a 1,000 counter 4-map game like all. This one took about 2 months. It was in S&T magazine, and I wrote the article there. And Dunnigan was happy with that. Okay, so now we're going to go into the last part of the lecture, although it's probably just as long as the other parts. This is like what I'm working on now, current designs, 1982 to the present. 1982, because that's where I stopped at Avalon Hill when I was working on Rising Sun. So this is my attempt to be like Clinton Warren Davies, to explain what I consider fundamentalist design. So I start with a thesis question. My thesis question is usually, what is the most important thing in this battle or this military situation that I want to build the game around? And then a subsidiary question of that is, what are the things I should leave out and all like that. But I always have that question, like, what is the most important thing? A game can have 2 or 3 important things. A game can't have 15 or 20 important things and all like that. Second thing is limited game scope. This we can get into with Clint Warren Davies about how he looks about this. But like what I'm saying is, let's just leave it at this. For me, if a game is going to take more than 2.5 hours to play, the scope is too large. Or if a game is going to have more than maybe 15 game turns, the scope is too large. So this is a real design approach where you begin thinking about not necessarily the player, but you're saying, what would I want from a game about the war in the Pacific and all? And the answer is, I want a game that makes uncertainty, fog of war, and surprise the most important part of that game. I should just mention for a minute, and we talked about never be boring. Well, maybe I'll just keep going and I'll come to that in a minute. A restrictive point of view. A restrictive point of view means you shouldn't know more than whatever historical counterpart the game is designed to reflect. And this also deals with limited game scope. In the real world, if a person commands, let's say, a division or an army, that's enough for him to keep him busy. And if he doesn't do it well, he's going to lose his job or he's going to lose his rank or something like that. Games that tend to say, oh, you have to be in charge of the production of all kinds of armament throughout World War II. And you also have to decide, like, where to put all the armies. And you also have to keep track of all the political machinations that are ongoing, like, like that. I understand that some people like that, but to me, it would never be, to me, that reduces realism, because there would never be a real world situation where a person would either want or get that much responsibility. They simply wouldn't be able to do a good job of it and all like that. And most people have better idea of what they're capable of doing and all. So once again, players may love this and all like that, but it's kind of silly and immature to have a game that like expects you to run not only all the military operations, but to run the whole national and international political situation and the economy. And if people have a lot of time and they like that stuff, that's fine with me. Different strokes for different folks. I would never be playing a game like that. Restricted point of view, I just want to make sure everyone understands. If you're Meade or Lee at Gettysburg and all like that, what do you actually know about what's going on at, say, 3 o'clock on July 2nd and all like that? is what you know. Is what you know. I'm assuming you're going to represent Lee or me because you're going to be in charge of the whole Confederate force on that battlefield and all like that. If what you know as the game player greatly exceeds what Lee actually knew, then what are you trying to stimulate? What are you trying to like mimic and all like that? You're not mimicking anything historical. You're simply saying, I'm going to design a game where people can see everything and have lots and lots of choices and all like that, and feel a sense of power and control and omniscience and all. I'm sorry, I'm beginning to get overexcited. I feel strongly about these things, like it all. Okay, the next thing is a small footprint. Very practically, most people don't have enough space for these big games, like and all like that. Again, it would be presumptuous to make a 9-map game and expect someone to play it if they only live in a 3-bedroom apartment or something like that. These two are going to be very important. Plausibility and playability. I think playability is understandable. It means that like a movie or like a football game, it can be completed by 1 or 2 people in an afternoon and it can be replayed, let's say, frequently, like a football season and all like that. If it doesn't meet that criteria, for me, it's not playable and all like that. Plausibility is what I was talking about the restrictive point of view. Does the game provide does the game constrain or restrict the player in terms of his decision, in terms of the decision it asks him to make? Does it constrain him in a way that a real world counterpart is constrained and all? Actually, I can give you, should I do that now? Well, let's just finish this. Appropriate player decisions, that's similar to the restrictive point of view and the plausibility. We should say a little bit more about plausibility. And never be boring comes from the screenwriting. And that, of course, is subjective. Some people are not bored by these large games, and that's fine with me. Okay. I do want to say one thing about fundamental design, since that's the title up here. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I realized I can give a good analogy. I have a friend who's a miniatures player. I've never really been too much of a miniatures player, although I read a lot of miniatures rules and stuff like that and all. But he invited me to be an observer at one of his games. And they were doing World War II Eastern Front tactical game, like all like that. I think it was 1 or 2 battalions and all like that, probably 1 battalion. I don't know. Anyhow, and they had some tanks, and they had anti-tank guns, and they had infantry and all. And it was on a pretty big table, an 8-foot table, I think it was 8 feet and all. And they had nice terrain and everything like that. And so this is about fundamental game design, okay? So I'm watching it for about 10 minutes, and people, they move their units, and then they fire. And then the other guy moves his units, and then he fires. Now we're getting dangerously close to what I call simultaneous movement, which everyone hates. But I said there were 4 people playing. I said, how long is a game turn? And they said 20 minutes. And I said, in 20 minutes, does a German tank really only have 1 opportunity to fire? Or is a German tank going to move and fire and keep going until it's taken out by an anti-tank gun and all like that? And they said, well, for game terms, we want to only make it that you either move or fire. And whichever you do first, you do the opposite of the thing. That makes it playable and all like that. Well, right there, that's what I call getting the fundamentals wrong and all. If you actually watch a tank battle, they do stop when they fire because of having a platform that's level, and it helps them aim and hit their target. So they do stop, but then they immediately go again. And in 10 minutes, they might fire 6 or 8 times and all like that, effectively and all like that. So when I say fundamental design getting it wrong, what I'm saying is, does this designer really build a game that makes it feel like what it would feel like if you were watching this battle? Or does it feel like a game that's set up with certain rules and conventions to make it playable but not realistic? I don't like that. Or is it a compromise? I don't like that. A good compromise is probably the best we can hope for. I don't like that. But these people had no desire to actually observe tanks in action and then make the game reflect that. I want to talk about the opposite of fundamental design. In the same miniatures game, there's a tank that's shooting over a wall, okay, into some kind of courtyard or something like that. I don't know. And this is not a major flaw. This is just something where I'm trying to explain the difference between fundamentalist design and detailed design. So I'm watching again, and the guy says, well, this tank is shooting at those people over this wall. And I said, how is the tank able to depress the gun to actually hit those people if it's shooting over the wall? And all like that. And, they threw me out at that point. and all like that. Now that's not as big of a problem as the other one. That's showing getting a detail wrong. Details don't really bother me, but I was just trying to understand the thinking behind this game, and that's why you can understand now why I say I've always been angry and disappointed when I see war games and all like that. As I said, compromise is what's necessary. I can't do it perfectly, and neither can anyone else. But you should understand the reality. And if you're going to sacrifice reality, you should make up for it by making the game shorter or doing something else that, if it's not going to be realistic anyhow, why the hell should it take 15 hours to play? And all like that. Okay, let's keep going. Did you have any questions?
No, that was great. That was fantastic.
Okay. Okay, so now we're into the games that I'm actually working on right now. And these games they use a whole new approach to map design and to game mechanics. And they're twin games. My idea is that they'll be sold together as like a bundle. And the name of the bundle is War Across Europe. They can't be linked together, although I could devise an expansion kit that could link them together. But that's 1944 and 45 on the Western Front. This is 41 to 45 on the Eastern Front. The games are designed using identical concepts. The games are designed using the same aesthetics and using the same layout and using the same game scale. Not necessarily the map scale, but both of these games take place on Army group and Army level, not on Division Corps level and all like that. These are strategic games and all like that. They solve the problem for me of what is an Army group and an Army commander responsible for and all like that. They also, okay, so on the maps, these are the Army groups and these are the armies, and there are 7 or 8 armies and 3 or 4 Army groups. Obviously, this is the Army Group North, Army Group South, and Army Group Center, and there are 2 or 3 armies in each of that. And those are the only moving pieces. There are static garrisons that can be put into these cities and all like that, but you only have 7 moving pieces, okay? Or 10 if you count the groups. Same with this one and all like that. So a lot of people will say, well, this looks too simple, or this looks like a child's game or a toy or something like that. And all. My answer is that this game works well for the game scale. And the game scale works well for the amount of time that people that I want people to play my games. These games are both playable in about 2 hours. They're both divided into shorter scenarios that are color coded. The graphic artist is a little behind this one or something like that. So these are not the final prototypes. These are playtest games. The turns here are months, and the turns here are seasons. And the shorter scenarios are all 4 of the games. I'm going to show you 2 more. All 4 of the games have this approach to scenarios. There's a initial offensive, then there's a counter-offensive, and then there's the campaign game. In the war on the Western Front, there's the Allied invasion of D-Day. There's the German counter-offensive at the time of the Bulge, and all like that. Those are the 2 scenarios. The second scenario, they're color-coded down here. These tracks in here are the turns. Just the ones below that have to do with supply. The second scenario starts in December 1944, which is the month that the Bulge counteroffensive or the Ardennes counteroffensive is launched by the Germans. Similarly here, well, I said that this isn't right, the turn record trail, but this is basically going to be first scenario will run up to 42 to Stalingrad, and the second scenario will run the counteroffensive by the Russians backward. In this case, the turns take about 10 or 15 minutes a turn and all like that. So this shorter scenario is 60 minutes. This one is about 70, I think, 70 minutes or something like that.
I gotta say, Frank, I don't think that they look like toys or childish at all. They look fresh. They look like something we haven't seen, especially on a land game. And I find that these maps are they're totally, they draw me in because I'm instantly trying to figure out what's going on. You know, what's with the color coding, what's the difference between the larger circles and the smaller ones, and things like they instantly make me want to figure out how it all works.
Okay, there's I could just say a little bit more about these maps, and all like that. I'm very proud of these maps. I have a new graphic artist working with me from Japan. His name is Soichiro Nakami, Nakame. And well, he's a very, very talented artist and illustrator. He's not as much of an information designer as Redmond was, but he's basically following my guidance and all like that. In terms of the artwork and the colors and all like that are pretty much him, and the layout and the concepts behind the games. You mentioned the colors. In all these 4 games, there's 2 levels to these maps. These maps, although they look simpler, they're actually, I think, more information rich than most text maps. First of all, these circles and all are called operation zones. And then there's going to be groups of 3 circles that are the same color, 1, 2, 3. That's called a campaign zone. The campaign zone and all like that, as well as the operation zone, will influence a lot of factors having to do with supply and victory and command control and stuff like that. So there's a relationship. It's not like each hex is individual and detached and is just like a point on the map. There's a logical grouping of these operation zones that make them a set that has an interaction between them. That's one of the ways this is more information rich. Also, instead of having hex sites and stuff like that, the rivers are running through the operation zones, and there's a lot of other terrain, and practically all the terrain you would have on any hex map. There are forests, there are well, I'd have to go over here. There are mountains, that's the mountain symbol. There are rivers and all like that. There are army group boundaries, which constrain what a player can do with its forces, which a lot of players won't like, but it It helps you understand why this war was fought the way it was and all like that. There are ports, there are factory or industrial centers, there are capitals. There's all the terrain features that you see in a good hex game and all, but they're all in these circles as opposed to running along hex sites and stuff like that.
We're getting low on time, Frank. Is the next slide the maps of the other? Do you have the other? Are we going to see the other two? I assume it's maybe the Divine Wind and Civil War one.
Yeah, we'll go right to them. I just want to see, is there anything else I should say? The only other thing I want to say about this is a game that's essentially supply driven, both of these, and all like that. There are no movement allowances and no combat allowances or combat factors. Basically, like a game like, I forget the name of it now. Basically, like these games, every operation, movement and combat, runs off supply points. But the supply points are very limited, and the amount of the cost of any operation is very high. So and that's what dovetails with the small number of pieces. In other words, to launch what's called an envelopment attack, it requires 4 supply points. Okay. In terms of supply points, the highest any player can ever have is 20. So you're taking 4 points to do one attack, and if you want to attack again, you pay another 4 points, and you can attack again, like that. And basically, you can continue to move and attack as long as you have supply points to expend. And there is an alternating movement, like in this one, that's seasonal. The Germans move first in the summer, the Russians move first in the winter, and it's like sort of an option of who moves first in the spring. There's only 3 seasons: winter, spring, and summer, or winter, autumn, and summer. And all summer, each turn is 4 months. That's why there's only 3 seasons. And all. But it's important to understand that. I mean, I've talked about all these issues: low number of counters, low number of locations, supply driven, meaning you're very constrained by supply. You're not constrained by a movement allowance or by ganging up with combat factors. You're constrained by spending supply to launch various kinds of combat actions or movement actions, like and it makes the whole game much simpler and all like that. And you don't have to like count hexes, and you don't have to try and like optimally place every combat factor for the attack. That's something that I despise and all like that. But a lot of players love it, and that's their privilege. Okay, so you asked me about this. This is actually the first game in the series. This is the one I've been working on since 1982. This is called Divine Wind. It's about the whole Pacific War, like Mark Herman's game, Pacific War. It's supply driven. It's, again, only 7 movable pieces on each side. These are fleets and all like that. These, again, you have the operation zones and the campaign zones color-coded. These are the supply tracks. These are the supply costs and all like that. There's a couple of layers of this game that make it more complicated than the land games. Simultaneous hidden campaign movement and naval code breaking and all like that. So let's just very briefly talk about that. But I want to make sure everyone understands campaign zones and operation zones. Now we're going to go a little below the surface, but not very far in this game. Okay, so this is an example of a tactical display for carrier battles. Now we're no longer in Candyland. This is a complicated display that features carrier actions. In this, you'd have one carrier force here, like a Japanese force, and you'd have an American force here, and you'd have the aircraft. These are land-based aircraft. The carriers, of course, will have their own aircraft and all like that. And this is the sequence of the turns. Recover, basically refuel and launch and all like that. And then there are all these other factors. This is the sequence of play, which has weather, search, launch, cap, bomb, torpedo, land-based aircraft, recover, and all like that. This is the time. These battles take place over a period of hours and all like that. And things that happen at the same time are considered simultaneous. Things that happen at different times are not considered simultaneous and all like that. And there's other things here, but this is a layer of complexity that people, it might be too much for people. The question is, with only 7 moving pieces, does it make the game too long? And so far, I think I'm still in that 2 to 3 hour period for the whole war. Now, here's the most fun part that everyone loved when I showed this game in public and all like that. This is a Rummy Cub. I guess it's called Rummy Cub. It's some kind of game like dominoes or something like that. And that's where you hold your like little pieces and all like that. And this game is emphasizing what I consider the most important element that I mentioned earlier, surprise and fog of war. So it's going to be very hard for people to really get this because I'm going fast. But basically, this is a non-written form of simultaneous movement. And in terms of campaign zones, you're going to move fleets into different campaign zones and all like that. And that movement is pre-plotted and simultaneous. So how do you do it that doesn't make it like time-consuming and difficult? Okay, so these things here are fleets. On the other side, it will identify what the fleet number is and stuff like that. And well, these things are the zones. So it's hard to read here, but there are basically 8 campaign zones on the map. So these are those 8 campaign zones. And basically, and these are secret operational names. So basically, if you're saying AI, it means that you're sending the Japanese, what's it called? I guess it's the Kido Butai and all, but it could be a different fleet. You're sending them to a zone, and that zone would be, I don't remember whether it's called the Hawaiian Islands or Pearl Harbor is the operation zone, but you're set. So what I'm saying is when you set this up for your 7 fleets, you're basically saying which fleet is going where that turn. And you don't have to assign all the fleets to operate because you don't have enough supply necessarily and all like that. And you don't have to, you could send more than 1 fleet to the same zone and all like that. But using the 3 markers allows you to do hidden simultaneous movement and all like that. Now there's a part here that's even more fun and all like that, which is code breaking. Never been done in a Pacific War game before, like and all like that. See these letters down here? And see the cup? The cup is going to be filled with 12 letters. And you start picking out of the cup if you're the opposing player. And when you pick the letters that match one of these tiles, then you can look at that operation. You can basically inspect this without the other player knowing it. Basically, you're going to switch these. I'm going to give you mine and you're going to give me yours. And based on what your code breaking is, you might be able to tell what that operation is. The thing about code breaking is you get better at it as you go on. You have first of all, some of the so basically it's like concentration where you're trying to match the letters that you pick with the letters in these operations and all like that. And when you have both letters, you have broken that code and all like that. The Americans are a little different and all like that. But so what happens is I pick these letters, you give me this thing and it stands facing away from me so I can't see the back. I pick these letters one at a time. If I pick a match, if I pick a letter that's on one of these counters, then I can pick again. If I pick a match, I pick again. So I get better and better, quicker as the game goes on. The main thing is the enemy player. This is the Japanese operation planner, and well, the enemy player or campaign planner, I think it's called. The enemy now it's the Americans who are going to code break this. Okay, the Japanese player does not know which letters you picked or which operations you've decoded. So he's committed to go ahead and do that operation. But now, like at the Battle of Midway, the Americans know that the Japanese are coming to Midway and all like that. So this is the part that most people characterize this game. They think it's cool. It's not too complicated and all like that. And it's not too time consuming and all like that. And they think that it's just cool, a cool mechanic and all like that. But I'll be honest with you, this is Chrome. The design of the campaign zones and the operation zones on the map is what underlies this and all. And that's the important part of the design. This is more like flavor and Chrome and all like that. I want to go on to the next slide. Okay, this is the last game in this series. This is the game that I don't have the good prototype map for yet, but you can see this is the way it would look when I finished the design of the playtest map, and then it would go to the artist, and they make it look like those Eastern and Western Front maps. Again, all the concepts are very similar, even though now we're in the Civil War and all like that. There are these are operation zones. The three of them together are a campaign zone. This is another campaign zone, the Far West or the Western Theater and all like that. These are the names of the campaign zones down here. Trans-Mississippi, Northwest, Southwest Kentucky, Tennessee. And again, there are only 8 campaign zones. So again, it doesn't take a long time to decide where an army is going to be operating for that turn. The turns up here are seasonal again. The whole war is 15 turns, like and all like that. There are only 5 moving pieces, 5 armies. Here they are: the Army of Northern Virginia, Army of Kentucky, Army of the Valley, Army of the Mississippi, and similarly for the Americans. This is again the supply track, up to 10 here, like and all like that. Everything costs supply and all like that. The only other thing I'll mention here is a little about the specialized terrain. There are also railroads and rivers on this map and all like that. What do I want to say about this? Oh, and there's also, these are rail junctions that have these little locomotives in them, and the rivers have the little, I don't know what you call that. It's a transport, it's a naval transport. So that means that this zone can be operated by troops that are operating on naval transport, as can this. This one couldn't be in there because it doesn't have the little ship in it and all. The railroad and all like that connects all the major rail junctions. You basically can intercept by attacking and taking control of these junctions and all like that. So it works like a hex map, but there are fewer places that you have to worry about. And to be honest, because this is a strategic game about the Civil War, why would you be worried about every single hex in Mississippi or Louisiana? Wouldn't you only be worried about Vicksburg or Mobile? Or you understand, getting rid of those hexes that are strategically unimportant is part of the fundamental design. Last thing I'm going to say, because this is cool, there are these little cavalry officers. These actually act, and I didn't explain this, but in Divine Wind, there's what's called air reconnaissance. In this game, I transported the same idea to cavalry reconnaissance in certain zones and all like that. So you basically like rolling for a search, like you would in a carrier game. And these are the zones, like in all, where you can deploy cavalry as pickets or screens. Not every single zone has it. There's the ports and all like that. Here's the terrain key. Again, this game should be played in pretty close to 2 hours for the whole thing, and all like that. I think I have 1 or 2 more slides. Do I have any time left?
Well, we're at 2 hours, but if we might as well, you know, there's a few people left. We might as well have a look at the last 2 slides and
Okay.
what the heck.
Okay. This is like the controller for the aircraft carrier battles. This is a
Right.
controller for Civil War battles, like with replaceable terrain in the middle here, like, you know, like that. That's the cover and the name of this game. So you could resolve combat without going down to a tactical display, but you can go down to the tactical display. It doesn't lengthen the game that much, because remember, there's only 5 armies in this, on each side. That we've already dealt with. This is important for those Eastern and Western Front games. Very important. This is the attrition track. This is the step track and all. These are the armies on this side, and these are their strengths.
Oh, so it's like each army has like 10 steps.
Yeah, well, they could have less than 10 steps.
Right, right.
They can't have more than that, like, you know, like that. But it allows for grading, for fine graded attrition, although the combat results table is bloody, so there won't be that much fine grading and all like that. But I don't really understand it. There are some other games that use this approach now, mainly in the Civil War that I've seen and all. But I don't really understand why people had all those the Pollard counters that allowed you to reduce, but only by putting a counter underneath it. Because I have a small number of pieces, I can record all the attrition and all the status, including replacements and everything like that on these organizers, like, and all like that. And the enemy doesn't know the strength of anything.
Right. So hidden information.
Right, and all like that. And also, the armies can have different types of units. They can have armor, infantry. I guess that's a supply marker. That indicates how much supply this army has. And all, I can't really see these two. I could blow it up and all, but I can't really do it on this. But this is important that, again, I've tried to make more elegant the record keeping and the application of losses and stuff like that. I've tried to boil it down into a very manageable thing and all. And so what I'm saying is, for each army, you're recording the number of armor divisions, the number of infantry divisions, the supply level that they have. I'm not sure if this is considered airborne or something like that, but or that might be a static division. I'm not sure and all like that. But what I'm saying is, so using 3 or 4 markers on each track lets you record everything. And right. You don't have to pick up stacks and replace things and all like that and all. So I'm glad we got to that slide. I don't know, people might hate it, but I like it. Okay, so these are the 3 games of the 4. This doesn't have the Civil War. Again, it shows you what I call less hexes, more history. They share the same game system. There's no hexes, no zones of control, no math. We didn't really talk about how you resolve combat and all. But basically, it's more simplified. There are no combat strength points, but there are strength points in the armies, and the armies have other ways of modifying, including the type of attack they launch, which of course has a relationship to the amount of supply and right. all like that and all. Okay, so this is another thing on fundamentalists, and I want to go through this. This is Warren Davies. He gave this great presentation online, and this is his technique, and I really admire it, and no one else really is doing it. This is the way Warren Davies designs games. First, he designs the shortest amount of time you need to play the game. In other words, he looks for, well, what's the least amount of time I want this to play? Then he determines how many critical decisions players need to make. He came up with World War II, 80 decisions and all like that. And he broke them all down. And an example of that is, do you invade like Britain, or do you invade Russia or something like that? That's an example. They're all sort of bipolar decisions and all, and there are 80 of them and all. And then he figured out how long each of those decisions should take. Okay, choose the most efficient game scale to support the smallest footprint, fewest units, shortest rule book, and fewest game turns the game requires. Emphasize important soft concepts such as command chain, fog of war, intelligence, morale, supply, and surprise. I should just say, surprise is considered by Danny Parker and by Trevor Dupuy, a famous military analyst. Surprise is considered the most effective variable in war, and yet war gamers, because of their desire to play solitaire, they totally forget about surprise. There's almost no surprise in war games, and that's one of the reasons why Danny said it didn't work. Well, minimize the amount of historical detail, chrome optional rules, and filler scenarios. Shorten setup time and speed of engagement. Minimize the number of different locations and terrain features. Minimize the number of units and markers on the map. Minimize players' actions that require time-consuming movement or combat-related counting and calculation. And all. This is pretty much my philosophy, and I was like awestruck when I saw how clearly Clint Warren Davies has figured this out for himself, and the last thing, this is the last slide, like that. And we've covered a lot of this. Who does the player represent? What are the appropriate decisions and limitations for that chosen scale and scope? Real battles are not decided by odds calculations and location optimization. Battlefield commanders don't have time to trace the best movement path and optimize numerous jump-off points. This is pure fiction. This is, when I say it's fiction, this is the game mechanic, it's the game paradigm that we've inherited from the 1960s about how to stimulate war or how to represent war and all like that. And it's fine. And people who like math enjoy it and all. It's very much puzzle. It's very much like a jigsaw puzzle and all like that. The problem is, in a real battle, people don't have the time to analyze the terrain like that and all like that. They're just told go on the left flank or hold this place, and all like that and all. And so what bothers me about watching war games is when the players count out one movement point and then they try a different movement path, and then they say, if I move this guy here, I can get one more strength point into the combat. Well, that's pure fiction. That has no relationship to the real world and all like that. And like I said, if you like that style of war game, then you can keep playing it That's what was never making sense to me. And that's what I said. When I read a war book, they never discussed movement points or movement allowance or figuring out which terrain path was best and all like that. Everyone just took what was possible and did it and all like that without a lot of analysis. The force multipliers that are most decisive in real war are undervalued or misrepresented in most war games. They are intelligence, supply, and surprise. Time is often the real enemy. War is not a solitaire pastime or a leisure sport. No one ever won a battle by moving units with gamers' infinite precision. You should know what I mean now and all like that. That war games all deal with moving specific units into specific hexes to gain tactical advantages, which, as I say, is fine, but is that the way real war is experienced and all? And I say no. Wargamers like to decimate enemy units. Real generals are measured by minimizing loss and all like that. And that's sort of the end of the presentation, and I feel like I've been long-winded and probably very boring myself.
No, it was fabulous, Frank. We are at 2 minutes or we are at 15 minutes over. So if anybody who's left has a question, now's the time to get it. But I know folks have other things that they want to see as well at the convention here. So, but in the meantime, Frank, thanks so much for that. I got exactly what I wanted. I wanted all that history stuff about SPI and Avalon Hill because I've been sort of playing games from both those companies all my life. Sort of the length of your design career sort of is like when I started playing to now, right? So that was fantastic. And then I'm totally intrigued by these 4 new games and the fact that you're using the same system for the Civil War as for World War II. That's like I want to see how that works out.
Because I'm only interested in the fundamental aspects, and war is pretty consistent and all. It's pretty consistent when you think of logistics, intelligence, surprise, and command, and all like that. And anyhow, I'm glad I had the chance to present all this information. I do have a lot of people who are interested in these games. I try and post updates on my Facebook page and my Blue Sky page. We are making a lot of progress, and there's a lot of advance going on. I was showing you somewhat dated components and all like that. There's a lot of advance going and filling in holes of all the things, the way supply works, what the constraints are, and all like that. We didn't even talk about any of that stuff, but there's not really supplied paths, but there are like junctions, rail junctions or river junctions that are important to hold in order to put people in supply on the other side, and all like that. And all. So anyhow, everything is new. What's that phrase? Everything old is new again, and all like that. Anyhow, Grant, thank you very much for giving me the floor for 2 hours, like and all. And I hope to see more designers taking more new paths. Believe me, there are lots of good ways to make games that are both plausible and playable. And I think we're only scratching the surface.
Well, I thank you again for the presentation, and this will live on my YouTube channel. So any designers that are interested that weren't able to come tonight will still be able to see it. It has an infinite afterlife. So thanks again, Frank, and thanks to everybody who stopped by to listen and watch, and enjoy the rest of the convention.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everyone.